I call the Honourable Member Claire Curran.
Mr Chair, thank you for the opportunity to talk to Part 1 in the committee stage of the Trademarks, International Treaties and Enforcement Amendment Bill. And as you've heard, Labor supports this bill, and as my colleague, the very esteemed and honourable Pete Hodgson has said, it is a moving feast and it is important. And it's important for a range of reasons. And I'd like to make a couple of points about this bill. The first one being that it's interesting that it was a bill that was introduced first into the House, I think, to September 2008, and had its first reading at the beginning of 2009. And I was just flicking through some information about it and noted that an article in an esteemed publication, I think, The Independent, which talked about how the bill was going to be passed this year in 2009, and note that it's taken a while to come back and finish its hearing in the House. And it hasn't had a lot of discussion, public discussion. There's been a bit of public discussion around it, but when you actually contrast it with another piece of legislation that's been before this House and was recently passed earlier this year that dealt with copyright issues, which certainly did have a lot of public discussion around it, it's quite interesting to make that contrast. And the contrast I'd like to make is essentially as a positive one, Mr Chair, in the sense that this bill is about harmonising our laws with international standards, which makes a lot of good sense. It's about New Zealand playing its part and leading some areas of standards development in this area. And it's about enabling innovative New Zealand companies to more easily protect their trademarks in multiple jurisdictions. And those are really important things. And the key to that, I guess the thing that I'm trying to point out here is that particularly around the harmonising and leading and playing a part in leading the way and enabling innovation to occur, I suppose, and encouraging our own business community is what we should have been doing with the other piece of controversial legislation that came before the House in this session, in this term, and admittedly in the previous term, Mr Chair, and still is surrounded by controversy because it hasn't been dealt with and hasn't been acknowledged as being as part of a much bigger issue, which is about how to deal with a very fast-changing environment, how to deal with the private sector involvement around it, and how to deal with the role that government should play. And those are really important points because essentially that still is an issue that we're confronted with in this country, that we've got a piece of legislation that did get passed which is essentially propping up failed business models. And I'm making that point, Mr Chair, in relation to Part 1 of this bill because there is a growing problem around the world relating to the manufacture, distribution and sale of counterfeited goods and pirated works, and for the purpose of selling them, not for the purpose of downloading them and then sharing them with your mates or watching them yourself, but actually accessing them and then sharing and then selling them. And the World Customs Organisation estimates that counterfeiting and piracy accounts for 5% to 10% to 7% of global merchandise trade, which is up to, I think, was estimated at the US $500 billion, and the world. And this comes from the MED regulatory impacts extracts around this bill, that the World Health Organisation estimates that up to 10% of medicines sold worldwide are counterfeit, which is extraordinary when you think about it. And and that goods typically targeted by counterfeiters are those items sold at premium prices and well in excess of the cost to manufacture. And these items can...
I call the honourable member Joe Goodhue.
I move that the question be now put.
No, I'm